So I'm back from my personal purgatory of playing almost 100 industrial sabotage missions. It really felt like I was being held hostage by rival tech. And I kind of was, honestly. What was originally going to be just about industrial sabotage has in itself evolved into a full-on rival tech evolution. Without further ado, now, I want to be real, I never really liked this mission. It just doesn't click with me. Despite that, its development has always interested me. Originally, it was lightly considered for Update 32 as the third mission type, but was quickly postponed and reserved for the future. It has roughly went through 3 reworks before seeing the light of day, and now it's finally time to get to it. Starting with Sabotage's first phase. Originally, the rough idea was that Deep Rock came across a bunch of abandoned alien tech and was simply called Facility. Oh yeah, and here's the updated icon evolution with what I found of Sabotage. Yeah, I didn't catch it turning some weird-ass color. The first iteration of this mission was quite different and simpler, only having faint resemblances to its final state. The caves it generated at this time are practically the same to that of Eliminations. The first goal will sound familiar. The dwarves need to locate a number of generators, ranging from 0, which breaks the mission, up to 2 generators. Except there's no other way to find these generators but to slowly explore these barren caves. And the only way to know how many of these generators you need to find is through the debug message. When finally locating one of these generators, they then need to be activated by holding E. Also, yeah, it's practically the first model of the generator. Did I mention that the generators can sometimes spawn inside of the ceiling? Once all the generators are active, the player then needs to locate the main facility, which is usually the easiest to find. Then, when the facility is activated, it'll shoot out one of these beacons and trigger a wave of enemies. The beacons need to be activated by repeatedly smacking them with a hammer. Shortly after, a blue-colored explosive barrel dispenser will arrive. Except they dispense these tethers which need to be connected from the beacon to the facility. Once connected, the dwarves then need to press E on the facility again, which will cause an explosion and another blue dispenser will be summoned. The entire process of connecting the tethers to the facility needs to be repeated twice more. After the final beacon is connected, the facility will then disappear, leaving these 3 yellow rectangles behind. They are apparently the connection points for the tethers. And then, the escape pod will be summoned instantly. It seems like it's tradition at this point that the early mission iterations don't let the player manually start the escape sequence, going back all the way to the pre-alpha. In this next build, the mission's cave layout changes entirely. It's now this strange semi-linear cave with rooms that loop around themselves. Makes finding the generators easier. When it comes to the generators, they now emit a red glow. When holding E on them, they start rotating, and turn green when the action is complete. There's a new enemy introduced called Facility Drone, which is a hoop with Betsy's turret for its head. A set amount of them seem to spawn on generators in the facility. It'll drive and fly around the caves, roll into dwarves, fire the machine gun at the dwarves, and occasionally release a ring of 6 rockets, which are... well, they're trying their best. Just like in the previous build, once all the generators are active, the facility can then be confronted. They've made some adjustments here. Now the beacons are attached to the blue dispensers, meaning that you now have to connect the tethers from the dispenser to the facility. Also, the facility drones will spawn alongside the enemy wave as it should. After connecting the tethers, another dispenser will be summoned with the beacon. The process of connecting them to the facility needs to be repeated twice more, similarly to the previous build. Only problem is that the sequence is incredibly buggy in this build. Most often, not all the dispensers will arrive. Luckily, since it's in such an early state, it's very easy to exploit the mission by reconnecting the same beacon again. The HUD now curiously lists an actual objective, but when I deposit the core, it doesn't actually count as completed, and I somehow managed to summon 2 escape pods. Yeah, that was really funky. It's worth noting that this new cave layout generates super long tunnels. Here's a cool fly-through of one of these. There are many possible explanations for the tunnel. Two of my best theories are: old cave formations of elimination had an extra tunnel going from spawn to a random room. That's definitely a leftover from the mission using elimination as a template. Or a more lore-focused theory, they were dug out by whatever put the facilities there in the first place. And with that, I'd say that the next build is the start of the mission's second redesign. That being the first significant rework this mission has seen, for the most part fleshing out the facility-centered objectives. The cave layout is practically the same to the previous build, but seems to generate giant rooms more often, sometimes completely breaking the intended layout. Activating the generators remains unchanged, but how many you need to locate is now displayed on the HUD. The facility drones now have unique, untextured models. Well, aside from the barrel acting as a weak point. The facility model was completely changed into this giant platform with a sphere in the middle of it, seemingly random rectangles placed around it. One of them can be seen on the pink tool with Drone Garage in their name. I'm able to skip the generators entirely by activating the sphere at any time. Once activated, 3 defensive segments will start spinning around the facility sphere, and the blue dispenser will be summoned, along with some drones that will keep spawning until the final phase. But just like before, you have to connect the blue dispenser to the facility, except this time a vial will appear on one of the segments which needs to be shot. After that, the second phase will be initiated, during which various spheres launch in all directions that then turn into turrets. These turrets remain in recon mode until a dwarf gets too close. During its attack mode, when a dwarf enters the green cone, it will fire off a shot. Then while charging up another shot, the turret will stay still and its weak point will be revealed. Once the second tether is connected and another vial destroyed, the facility will spawn a few turrets and will now periodically teleport timed bombs to the dwarves. Non-stop. Even after the third vial is destroyed, it will continue. But the facility sphere will disappear, revealing the cargo battery or the core inside. Then the escape phase can begin. In this build, activating generators is now completely different. You have to rotate it by walking into one of the 4 handles for a while. With more dwarves, the pushing becomes faster, but really it's fake pushing, as you just have to stand on the red debug sphere while looking at the handle and the generator will push itself. This is clearly a Dwarka feature that the devs considered bringing back. The facility model now sort of carves out the room around itself. Instead of hammering the facility, there's now a button to start the sequence, which will summon the blue dispenser like always. In this build, the arrival sound for it is bugged, which was really annoying. The vials received their own unique model, just without textures. Everything else pretty much remains unchanged, except that the tethers are now destroyed after each phase, and there's an opening animation for the facility sphere. I should note that it plays much too fast normally, and I've slowed it down here. In the next build, the generator starts off closed. It will slowly reveal itself as it's pushed by the 2 fingers of a dwarf. Once the generator is fully activated, it closes back up. The facility drones now properly explode when killed. Beforehand, a part of them would awkwardly stay and disappear. When it comes to the facility, the vials now play a short animation of them opening up. The turret's appearance has slightly changed. The weak point was made bigger, and their view cone turns red when a dwarf is spotted. On to Update 33's development. Very few adjustments were made. Some early mission control texts are in place when activating the generators and the facility. Apparently the blue dispensers were called overchargers at this time. The vials now glow red, and the turrets now enter hiding mode instead of recon mode when there's no dwarf nearby. The turrets will also burst fire free bullets periodically when locked onto a target. In the next build, activating the generators is twice as fast. Facility drones now shoot lasers instead of bullets. Also, while it's in the floating state, it'll now occasionally fire green explosive lasers directly at the dwarves. The facility's rectangles are now color-coded and all of them can be marked. The yellow rectangle is a mortar, the cyan one is a turret launcher, and the red one is a drone garage. Starting up the facility sequence will now spawn a ton of facility drones. Clearing them will spawn more for a few cycles. Connecting a tether to the facility will emit a purple discharge. The vials for some reason take more hits to destroy now. It appears that what the facility will spawn during its sequence is sort of randomized, but these are the possibilities after each vial is destroyed. It can spawn facility turrets, which now float around the area as these green spheres before landing and transforming into a turret. The green view cones of the turrets were swapped out with a radius marker indicating its detection range. When the turret is in combat mode, it'll now burst fire lasers at the players. The facility can spawn a blue floating orb which transforms into these later cut turrets, which spin around randomly and shoot in 3 directions. I'll just refer to them as directional turrets. The facility can spawn these purple orbs which transform into long-range turrets akin to that of a sniper sentry. Its detection range is unlimited as long as it has a sightline on a dwarf. It shoots green explosive lasers and has its weak point exposed while attacking. Lastly, the facility can also spawn these red orbs which transform into the repulsion turret. It emits barriers designed to push back anyone that makes contact with it. Interestingly, you can actually shoot through its barriers at this stage. The teleporting bombs are pretty much absent from this build. Moving on to Update 34's development, further progress was made to the mission. There are now sniper turrets around the generators and seem to exclusively spawn on the ceiling. Also, activating the generator was made even faster. When it comes to the facility, it now has 2 rotating segments, and during the first phase nothing special occurs. During the second phase, however, the facility will shoot rockets at dwarves that attempt to home in on them, and spawn a small amount of various turrets. We are entering the third phase of this mission's development. This is where it'll start forming into something a lot more familiar. And with the art team figuring out what they want for these robots to look like, they got to work on a bunch of concept art. For the most part, this style didn't stick as it looked too organic. They were going for hard geometric shapes from very early on, as it seems. Already in this build, the cave formation was completely reworked. It first starts with a single tunnel leading to the facility room. Then from this room, there are 2 more branching paths, both leading to a shield generator each. Half the time these wires leading to said generators will appear. Here's a view of this particular cave layout from the top. Now with the objective related assets highlighted. Yeah, I'll soon explain why the facility is shaped like that. The generator's appearance has honestly downgraded. It's now a random formation of rectangles. The whole overcharge via tethers mechanic was entirely moved to these generators. By holding down E on the generator, it'll now summon the overcharger which needs to be connected to the generator. The tethers now show its connection range with a blue radius around the endpoint. Once connected, it'll instantly start overcharging and summon a wave of enemies. At this time, the glyphids didn't have any special targets set up, so they would just go after the dwarves. It takes a little over 1 minute for the overcharge to complete. Of course, you have to do the same thing twice more. Yeah, not once more. After you overcharge the second generator, there's a third one at the facility. Well, let's take a look at how the facility has changed. The drone garage was repainted to fit the facility's color scheme better, and given these slabs on each side. The mortar building is now shaped like a giant lollipop. I mean, you can't argue with that. And the turret launcher is now a series of hexagons on a pole, or a metal shish kebab. All of these buildings are attached to a large base from below, so that they always appear in the same position relative to the facility. After dealing with the other 2 generators, we can now overcharge the one at the facility. As soon as the dispenser is summoned, the facility will start spawning drones, various turrets, and shoot slow-moving rockets from the lollipop. Also, the repulsion turret now blocks projectiles. After the third generator is overcharged, the facility battle will finally begin, which was also greatly changed. For starters, it now features a boss health bar. Apparently, its name at this time was Old Facility. Could have guessed, honestly. 3 robotic tentacles could emerge from the facility, each of them shooting lasers and charging at dwarves. The tentacles appear to be practically invincible. The player is encouraged to focus on the facility's sphere instead, as a small opening periodically appears on random sides of it, which is the only way to damage the building. As soon as the facility is defeated, all the tentacles vanish, and the sphere opens up. Disappointingly, the core hasn't changed. This build jump scared me, by the way. I don't know what I did, but it just kept making this weird fucking sound in the space ring. In the next build, a shield is placed around the facility itself, and the wires leading to the other generators now spawn consistently. There's a weird thing with the mortar building where it keeps throwing bombs at the players regardless if the facility battle is happening. Overcharging the generators now takes around 2 minutes. Some of the hostiles will now attack the dispenser. According to the debug message, it has exactly 200 health points. Once broken, the dispenser then needs to be restarted, which takes a while. As a side note, Facility Sawblades are available in the game files, but unused at this time. Its appearance is a ninja Bosco, melee attacking dwarves. Now we're hitting Update 35's development, also known as Season 1. Often the cave layout will mess up and won't generate a tunnel between the spawn room and the facility room in this state. There's also an actual UI in place for the mission, the biggest sphere being the facility, the sphere above it being the third generator, and the two small ones higher up being the other generators. First of all, the generator received a brand new and a much better model. This honestly roughly looks like a minimized version of what we ended up getting. Its new name is Shield Generator. Once the tethers are connected, a boss-like health bar will appear on the screen of the overcharger's progress. It also seems to take longer to complete an overcharge. Oh, and the new UI reacts to the mission progress, as you'll see throughout the showcase. The Shredder prototype called Sawblade now spawned naturally. The sniper turrets have a brand new model with animations and all. I'm kinda convinced that all the robots were meant to be colored black and white, and it's not just a placeholder thing. Interestingly, this color scheme kind of resembles the Megacorp paint job. Onto the facility, which received tons of visual changes. This is what the final shield generator looks like. This is what the drone garage looks like. You can see the little opening here from where the drones supposedly emerge. This is the turret launcher with a large opening at the top. The mortar bombs model, which I'm not so sure where the bombs are supposed to come from. And the facility itself, completely ditching the spherical design for an upside down giant pyramid. The facility's platform is also greatly changing as a result, now coming with the 4 openings for each tentacle and a giant pole sticking very deep into the ground. Activating the final shield generator will instantly start the old facility fight. The weak points now, instead of appearing on random areas, seem to consistently appear in the same spot of a given side. The tentacles, aka robotic appendages, can now be temporarily disabled, and all of them will be disabled instantaneously when progressing through each phase. Seems that every third of the health bar the facility will start spawning things. For the first phase, it'll spawn 1 thing, and for the second, it'll spawn 2 things from the facility's arsenal, which consists of facility drones, mortar bombs, seeking rockets, burst turrets, sniper turrets, repulsion turrets, and radial turrets. Whichever of the 3 buildings around it are active will start glowing red. Both the burst turrets and the repulsion turrets coming with new models of their own. The radial turret simply borrows the repulsion turret model. When the facility is destroyed, the pyramid will disappear, clear all the remaining enemies, and spawn the facility core a bit later. On to the next build. The wires leading to the generators now come with a little detail, or a little dongle. They start glowing red once their respective generator is overcharged. Facility drones have received some changes, now featuring a bright glowing orb at the center of its wheel. When the final generator is deactivated, the facility's shield will turn red to indicate the progress the team has made. 4 main shield deactivators appear around the main facility, each shooting out an explosive barrel when the button is pressed. During the facility fight, the robotic appendages can now emerge from the ground. Whenever a third of old facility's health is drained, it'll enter an invincibility state, scream, and spin around a few times. The robotic appendages no longer hide after each phase of the fight, but that could just be a bug. The next build has done some significant overhauls to the mission, and mission control voice lines are now in place.
Someone is trying to extract information on Hoxies, and we can't have that.
First of all, the burst turrets are now placed around the caves from the start. Facility drones now fire the green explosive laser in a different method, a lot more akin to the sniper turrets. Even though the blue dispenser is called the Overloader, Mission Control refers to it as the hacking drone. The particles connecting to the tethers have changed. It's now a blue laser with matrix particles flowing into the tether. Once it's connected to a shield generator, it now has to be activated manually. The biggest change made to the facility is the removal of the 4 buildings that were surrounding it. All those turrets, mortar bombs, and the like were merged with the pyramid. When the pyramid's shield turns red, it appears to summon 3 drones. Kind of sounds familiar. Pressing each deactivator is much faster. When it comes to the facility fight, I think we can actually start calling it the Caretaker. The robotic appendage appearance was changed. They seem to give off more tells before performing the stabbing attack. They start shooting lasers when nobody's nearby like normal, but they are also unusually loud in this build. Standing on the Caretaker's platform will now start the electrocution charge-up. Each of these squares light up as it charges and then shocks whoever was standing on the platform. Once a third of its health is down, it'll release a bunch of repulsion turrets. At the second third, it'll start tossing bombs at dwarves, and spawn exactly one facility drone. Appears that the RNG element is temporarily missing, as this happens each time, and after you defeat the Caretaker, you pretty much know the rest, except for the spinning battery. In the next build, pretty much everything related to the facility receives visual changes. The burst turret is now painted blue and given extra detail. Its top part now glows red as a hint of its weak point location. Sniper turrets received a similar treatment. Meanwhile, facility drones were finally given an actual model. They have a strange two-sided head. It's likely the artist's trying to pin down on its design. This upgrade also comes with a few animations. When it floats, it extends its four fingies. When it's on the ground, it'll fold them up. And upon death, it'll dismantle, then explode. Shredders also received the same treatment, exiting the placeholder model phases. The Shredders also got a simplistic animation for its attacks. The smaller part of the power station was not only painted blue, but also received red glowing and extra details. But for some reason, when connecting the power station to the hack pod, it will instantly start the process again instead of letting the dwarves manually initiate it. After the power station is disabled, it now plays an animation, and it'll emit electricity like it's been overloaded. I thought we were switching to hacking here. You may have already noticed some sudden name changes. Just as a heads up, plenty more will be coming. When it comes to the Caretaker, besides everything being painted blue, the pyramid receives a unique early model, making the weak point areas a lot more obvious. The Caretaker's platform also looks pretty different, but the main change it received is how the shield gets deactivated. Now there's a force field projector in place with 2 backup batteries beside it. The fight itself hasn't changed much. Appears that the Caretaker has too much health now and the shape of its weak point has changed. Funnily, it can damage itself with the electrical discharge. Once a third of its health is depleted, all the tentacles will hide and will still release a bunch of repulsion turrets moments later, which were also painted blue, but the barriers were painted red. Once another third is down, it'll actually get rid of all surviving repulsion turrets. Destroying the Caretaker will play a very rudimentary animation of the huge vault opening up, and an early model for the facility's core is now finally here. Oh wow. On to the next build. The facility drones are now hackable. We'll get to the minigame itself later. The hacking pod now has a unique model. It's a mock-up of the hacking drone itself, where we get to see its early appearance. And now dispenses tethers only from one side. It also gives a repair hack C-bot prompt when it's down. The power station was fully painted blue. The Caretaker's possible weak point locations were made more obvious with constant red glowing. And has a floating animation. Robotic appendages have a new appearance. Although its body is buggy in this build, it does come with a new model for its head. In this next build, well, first of all, the mission name finally changes to Industrial Sabotage, but Facility remains as the mission's internal name. The robots and buildings go through the final redesign. More of a reskin, really. The wires leading to the power stations have a completely different design. The burst turrets were painted brown and given a unique texture. They now emit a sound upon activation. Sniper turrets and shredders also received the same treatment. Facility drone's model has been more refined and given different textures. It also makes some sounds when switching to float mode, when locking onto a target, and when going to roll mode. The power station got the new textures, just like all the other Rival Tech stuff. But this animation now plays at all times, and it received a new one for when the station is hacked. The hacking pod was given the resupply pod colors. The tethers, or as they were later called, nodes, are finally textured and given a more detailed look. It also appears that the hacking was made quite faster, about 20% faster. The shield or the force field around the Caretaker doesn't use the generic force field effect anymore, and got one of its own. The Caretaker has received a huge amount of detail to its pyramid model. The black parts of it were given a new texture as well, and of course, the vault was also painted brown. The tentacles have received some visual changes as well. Most importantly, its body doesn't bug out Oh, nope, never mind. When it comes to the Caretaker battle, not much has actually changed. The Caretaker's health was lowered. During the final phase, all available tentacles are forced to bury into the ground, and the repulsion turret is brown. Dwarves no longer stuff their face into the data rack because some safety measures were put in place. In the next build, the mission's UI elements were adjusted as there hasn't been a third power station to hack for a while. The details and appearance of the patrol bot were ironed out, its rocket attack getting a rework. It now releases a barrage of rockets above itself and sends them after the dwarves. Burst turrets now have yellow glowing bits instead of red, and have a small detail of emitting a stronger glow if the area is damaged. Sniper turrets received the same visual changes. Repulsion turrets got a new model more akin to its final appearance, finally ditching the placeholder green weak points once and for all. The power station got some huge adjustments, and I'm not referring to its size difference. The sides of the model were split into 3 parts and given much more dynamic animations. It breaks apart when the hacking is complete, and those pieces are fun to play around with until they just freeze in place. Also, Hacking Pod has to be manually activated when the nodes are connected once more. When it comes to the Caretaker, the pyramid had some small adjustments, most notably the blue light coming from below. The vault has flourished with detail, and for some reason becomes pink when all the power stations are hacked. The barrier around the Caretaker also changes the shade of color. Fighting with the tentacles has been ironed out. Still has the same abilities, just that they were made better. For example, they won't constantly try to melee me now. The pyramid now plays an animation where it opens up after each phase. During the final phase, it will play this animation when launching bombs. The inside of the vault was given steps that don't actually work. Depositing the data rack will now warp it to the mule's back. In this build, the developers are mostly finishing up the various rival tech models. Burst, Sniper, and Repulsion turrets pretty much align with their final appearances, aside from some tiny kinks y'all might notice. In particular, the Repulsion turret got a new look for its force barriers. When the Burst turret is in sleep mode, it now surrounds itself with a shield. Shredders were also given a much more familiar look, as well as spinning its blades. Patrol Bot was further ironed out. It now has the rest of its sounds in place, and its rocket attack was changed so the rockets spread out a bit more. The power station is no longer dead silent. It overall got more lively with the help of particle effects, moving textures, and so on. The hacking pod no longer looks like a decoy resupply. In particular, the hacksy part of it was greatly improved, pretty much just missing the hacking animation. The nodes themselves were repainted to fit in with the pod. There's also that annoying debug blinking. When the power station is destroyed, it now emits an endless stream of smoke. When it comes to the Caretaker, its barrier effect received some adjustments. So did the pale colored one. The vault now has its lights on at all times. The force field projector's model was changed and given much more detail. Wrench icons now appear above the exposed batteries, and the thing it ejects now actually has a unique model. When it comes to the Caretaker fight, the robotic appendages got a completely redesigned head, but it doesn't know how to aim the thing yet. The Caretaker was given 4 yellow bars of armor, each corresponding to the pyramid's corners, but the corners have extremely low health at this time. The Caretaker's health has also been lowered. Caretaker was given a unique scream sound instead of reusing the one from Egg Hunt. After ending the first phase, it will release a bunch of shredders with repulsion turrets as a bonus. But now there is a floating and a full construction animation for those turrets. And after each phase, the Caretaker will spawn a patrol bot that is linked to the pyramid. Destroying this patrol bot will continue the fight and expose each of the pyramid's corners once more. Triggering the next phase will make the Caretaker toss bombs at the dwarves. But the bombs now have a very familiar animation and model. The way they worked at this time is that the pyramid would throw spheres, which would turn into the phase bombs we see today. Once the Caretaker is defeated, it will simply disappear. Then the vault will open along with the robotic appendage's spawn holes, and the rest of the animation will play out like normal. Well, mostly normal. Depositing the data rack completely changes its model and attaches it to the mule. In the next build, they finally redesigned the UI elements, which changes as the players progress through the mission. The shield for Burst Turret's sleeping state was changed. The way it shoots is also different. Instead of firing in a single straight line, it shoots from the top and bottom of its nozzle. Did I just call that a nozzle? Repulsion turrets have these yellow rectangles sticking out that act as its weak points. The shredders are now fully decked out, coming with a def animation and various adjustments. The hacking pod was painted back to brown, and now starts completely closed up aside from its node dispenser. The nodes were given some unique activation sounds. The effect for node connection was made entirely green. When connected, the hacking pod will pop out a red button. HackCBot maintains the colors from the previous build, upgraded its fans with some RGB, and now has a hacking animation where HackC mashes the keyboard. Moving on to the Caretaker sequence. The vault lights were fixed and only light up when the electric shock is being charged. The robotic appendages have learned how to utilize its newfound head and have electrical particles traveling across its body. The Caretaker now periodically releases giant force barriers during the boss fight. Each of the pyramid's corners were made much tougher, requiring more than a single poke to close the corners. Also, the red health bar is now segmented to indicate each phase. The phases are now randomized once more, but between 3 different possibilities: releasing a bunch of repulsion turrets, spawning a bunch of shredders throughout a phase. This is also when the Caretaker would attempt to shield its eyes by spinning 3 things around them, and teleporting phase bombs throughout the phase. Defeating the Caretaker will play an early version of its death animation. It'll topple over like normal, then it'll create a giant yellow bubble and finally explode. The data rack's model was changed and made the vault animation play out properly. Now we're jumping over to the first closed tester build. Most notably, the art pass is finished for all the rival tech machines, and the Caretaker fight has made huge progress. Repulsion turrets can now spawn in random parts of the caves alongside the burst turrets. The hacking pod was completely repainted, given some extra detail, and got a small dish placed on top of it. After activating HackC, various trash will eject from inside the pod. HackC is now wearing a hat and makes nerd noises. A secret petting animation was also added where it just interrupts the drone. There's also this very stupid bug, where you can stand in front of the nodes and block their connection to the power station entirely. Once the hacking is complete, the hacking pod will now go back to the space rig. At the Caretaker, when both of the batteries are removed, the force field now plays an animation of getting deactivated. When the pyramid awakens, it'll play this short angry sequence. When the vault's surface is charging up the electrical attack, it'll now reveal each of the power coils before zapping the dwarves. Robotic Appendage's body now has an orange glow running across it, and it shoots brand new laser projectiles. The edges of the giant repulsion attack were made more obvious. Each of the pyramid's corners were also given more health. When it comes to the phases, the repulsion one was swapped out in favor of spawning sniper turrets. Each of the phases received some minor visual improvements and some small buffs overall. And the bombs have a different warping sound than from their public version. Of course, the Caretaker's death animation was fully refined, known as one of the coolest sequences in the game. Despite my personal feelings on the mission, I have to agree. Oh wait, the data rack just floats in midair, but it did get some fancy effects. Now hopping over to the release build with a few hotfixes in place. As always, for the most part, they have really only done small adjustments and balancing. Most notably, the Caretaker fight flows better. Just as an example, in the previous build, the pause between each phase lasted way too long. During the Caretaker fight, patrol bots will now spawn after each phase, but the amount of bots that spawn seem to correspond to the player count. Giant force fields were made thinner, and the pyramid was given a bit more health. Lastly, the data rack no longer floats in mid-air and produces more interesting sounds. Not until the launch of Season 3 did they make any noteworthy changes to Industrial Sabotage. With this update, they added the mission into the deep dive primary objective pool and made a slightly shorter, less complex variation of it. The patrol bot's attacks now overall deal less damage. It can be given the frozen status effect, and it will also explode instead of reviving if it wasn't hacked. Sniper turrets also deal less damage per shot. Hacking the power station was apparently made a bit faster? It's not very noticeable, but it should be about 10 seconds faster than before. Also, the node's connection range was made a tiny bit longer. Finally, the Caretaker itself was made to be weaker to all of Driller's primaries. but it's still not that good. And hey, even after such a long evolution process, a part of the facility actually lives on beyond the internal name. Tagging the burst turret's base will still yield the facility turret name. Of course, now that I pointed it out, it might get fixed. And that's all there is to Industrial Sabotage for now. I've posted a gallery link in the description where you can find a bunch of screenshots and wallpapers I've made. Guess the wallpaper thing is now an Evolution series tradition. Next up, we'll be taking a look at the rest of Rival Tech stuff. Don't worry, most of them had a lot shorter histories than this mission did. Well, maybe except for the Prospector. I am sure that most of you have noticed that I am direct and quick with my evolution scripts. For this chapter, I want to experiment with a different approach. To those that made it this far, please give me some feedback in the comments. This giant pill trooper guy is the Prospector, believe it or not. Likely its very first iteration. It'll roam the caves passively while doing the occasional scan of, I guess, ghost particles. Shooting the pill will make it scatter around the caves until it gets far enough. Approaching it will make the pill panic again as it now has a newfound fear of dwarves. Actually, killing the trooper will yield the nagging from mission control, as you're not supposed to kill it. What you're meant to do is pickaxe the light blue pieces of the thing, or use the breach cutter. Of course it screams, because it's probably the equivalent of ripping its legs off, but it's now hackable and really that's what matters. The problem is that this bastard most of the time will keep floating around the area, so hacking can be really frustrating. Finally, completing the hack will reward the team with 300 gold and it'll just keep going. A bit later, the Prospector emerges from its egg and becomes this beautiful blocky boy with one tiny pickaxe and one tiny untextured shovel. It tries to stick to the ground now for fuel consumption reasons. From time to time, it'll wave its hands helplessly like the cute dumb bastard that it is. Attacking the rectangle will make a single patrol bot appear out of thin air as it enters panic mode. Shooting out the blue parts will make the guy stumble and slow down. Destroying it will yield one data cell and various dirt samples. But damaging both of the pieces will render the rectangle completely immobile, and it will finally give up its precious data cell if you just press E on it. Oh right, here's the data cell's appearance of this build. Some time passes and the Prospector has evolved, but seems to be in some sort of a frozen state. It's now this blue blocky guy with 6 tentacle-like arms and a bird's tail, all of which seem to be petrified. Aside from its new look, the only way to take down the Prospector is to shoot out the blue parts in this iteration. Everything else is exactly identical to its previous state. Guess it hasn't learned much else yet. In this next bit, the Prospector seems to be having an identity crisis as it turns pink, but has seemingly also evolved further, no longer relying on blue rectangles for its floating capabilities. The pink Prospector can be both destroyed and disabled once more. Here we can see that Prospector might have finally found itself. Brown? Just brown? Destroying the Prospector will yield a more child-friendly data cell. Are rivals secretly mocking dwarves by any chance? Also, the Prospector's will is a lot stronger now. It will not give up the data cell even when the thrusters are disabled. What the fuck is it doing? Whoa, our boy got a major makeover in this one. Sadly, no amount of fancy paint jobs and frameworks will unpetrify it. Now, from time to time, it will passively look at a wall and make digging noises with its mouth. The Prospector's thrusters were greatly refined and cannot be disabled anymore, only destroyed. Now appears to collect various minerals as it will drop them from time to time. As it turns out, it's a greenbeard as it collects gold. Oh man. Also, the Prospector made a different looking data cell. Good going, buddy. In this version, the Prospector found a way to remove its petrification and now can use its 6 noodle arms and tiny legs freely. The Prospector doesn't fake it anymore and actually digs out terrain, but it will still scan absolute emptiness. Some things just don't change. Seems like the Prospector got a promotion, because when you shoot at it, a boss health bar now appears on screen. A bunch of shredders alongside a patrol bot will teleport into the room. Damaging the Prospector enough will force it to turn on a temporary panic shield. As it keeps panicking, it'll non-stop call for help from its friends, who will sometimes show up. Defeating the Prospector will make it drop its contents in a much more glowy data cell. Now, onto the public debut of our boy. Its health bar has been segmented now. It got a bit more juice in its panic shield phase, and found some better friends. Overall, more robots will spawn in to its rescue. You might be wondering why there's no mention of the Prospector's beacon, like you knew that existed before just now. At the end of the day, it's just a reskin of the power generator hacking, and it doesn't have the best sound in the game like the Prospector does. Wait for it. Ooh! Moving on. While going through Sabotage, there was something I was hiding from you. The Facility Hover Tank. It floats around a random generator from time to time. It starts completely shielded from all sides, the top and bottom portions being exposed. It'll attack any dwarves in the area. The tank has two special attacks. One is where it releases a bunch of homing rockets from below, and the other is a slow blue mortar bomb. The shield can be easily destroyed, but it'll regenerate pretty quickly. Its hover engines can be shot off like weak points, and if all of them are destroyed, the tank will die instantly. Or it'll harmlessly remain floating in air indefinitely. That works too, I guess. At least a developer claims that this tank would eventually become the Nemesis. This guy honestly never had a super early placeholder state. The best I can do is show this concept art. They seemingly merged the A and C designs for its final appearance. Notice how one of the arms looks like a robotic snake head, an idea that was later cut. So here's the early appearance of the Nemesis, reusing the Caretaker's tentacles for its hands and has placeholder destructible weak points. Functionality-wise, it's very similar, except a lot buggier and unfair. It'll release a repulsion shield in the direction that it's being shot at. It'll charge and grab any players within range, and after death it'll spam a bunch of phase bombs. If you get revived near the Nemesis at this stage, it'll instantly grab you, then kill you again. And I somehow managed to get whatever this is to happen. In the next build, the Nemesis is pretty much finished, aside from its arms. It now plays the dwarf lure voice lines at all times. Makes a boop type sound when a vent is damaged and emits sparks from the damaged areas. Everything else is pretty much the same, but the grabbing behavior is a bit less jank. In the first public experimental build, the Nemesis got some brand new hands that act as claws for crushing dwarves. Nemesis now has aggressive voice lines for when it sees a dwarf, grabs a dwarf, and dies. Nemesis was made less grabby. Then, after release and a few hotfixes, it generally spawns less often. Its aggressive voice was tweaked, and upon death it does not use the aggressive voice anymore.
My God, it's full of stars.
Oh yeah, for Season 3 it says like 2 new voice lines for luring. We arrive at the final chapter, the hacking minigames and pretty much the rest of Season 2 stuff. I wanted to do a separate chapter for the minigames because... So when you shoot the blue patrol bot in this build, it has a chance to enter the hackable state for the first time. The hacking minigame would spin 3 hexagons around the gray circles. The goal is to hit each of the red hexagons by properly timing the button presses. In some cases, you can hit multiple or all of them with a single press. The UI is pretty minimal in this state, so it probably doesn't look like I'm doing anything. In the next build, the hexagons now spin at a linear speed, and you must match each hexagon one by one. Some very basic feedback is put in place for missing and hitting the targets. As the minigame progresses, the spinning becomes faster and faster until eventually the hacking is a success. In this next build, the minigame is pretty much redesigned. You only have to do the spinning hexagon thing once now. Then for the other part, you have to hit the lines as they go across the red hexagon. And for the last one, you have to match the circle with the green one. This one is pretty much the final minigame in an early state. Then in this build, the minigame got a very expensive coat of paint and looks presentable. The hexagons becoming squares, little indicators of how much there is left of the hacking sequence, and some flavor text for each of the minigame parts. Going from locating backdoor, fishing for password, injecting SQL, and overriding protocol. Now hopping over to Season 2's development. They added an entire season event centered around hacking and the mutator's specific building. The rival bomb event at this time comprised of simplistic shapes and seemingly some sort of recycled model for the wires. To start the event, you have to hack this weird shaped guy, Once active, the corresponding wire will light up red in an attempt to lead the players to the correct square to hack. If said player is too slow, the square will push them away. If the event is unsuccessful, the rival bomb will do a 3-second countdown and kill anyone within range. If the event is successful, it'll just casually let you claim the data core. For the mutator, it would enable rival enemy spawns as expected, but a random area of the map is guarded by burst turrets and snipers. These seemingly don't have a guaranteed chance to spawn. Functionally, it's pretty much the same as the release version, honestly. Except the transmitter has an early model. The hacking minigame for both events is recycled from patrol bots. And once the hacking is complete, all the turrets vanish unceremoniously. In the next build, the rival bomb event made some visual progress. The router basically got a low poly version of the final model. Meanwhile, the nodes have an orange zigzag near the top and are shaped like dull spikes. During the event itself, the wires light up in a static red to make finding nodes easier. In this build, the rival bomb received further visual improvements, both the router and nodes pretty much resembling their final forms. Although I cannot start the event, I suspect it has something to do with the wires not actually being connected to the router. I guess it doesn't support Wi-Fi. As for the mutator, it appears that the turret event has a guaranteed chance to spawn now. In the next build, rival bomb's nodes got some texture adjustments. The dwarves now have to disable the router's defense matrix with a hammer. The wires look different, the exposed node is made more obvious, and now there's a brand new hacking minigame about cutting wires. Simply both ends of the same colored wire need to be selected, then cut at a specific area. At the bottom of the hacking screen, there's a bar to show how much time is left before the node closes. Successfully hacking a node will make it light up green and open up. Completing the event will yield a large completion text on the HUD. Same goes for failing the event. In this build, the rival bomb event receives mission control voice lines. I've always found it interesting how mission control has two types of reactions to the bomb's detonation. One if no dwarf was hit by the explosion,
Cash is lost to us, but you're still breathing. Let's get on with the mission.
and another if the dwarves were hit by the explosion but survive.
No crying over spilled milk. You still have all your limbs attached. Get back to work.
In this next build, the nodes were given various animations. They all close when the event starts. Successfully completing the hacking makes the router turn bright green for some reason. As for the mutator, it was given a longer version of the wire cutting minigame, and upon successfully hacking, each rival tech turret will explode one by one. Now let's skip over to the release build of Season 2, with a few hotfixes. For the rival bomb event, the router itself is a lot more animated. You now have to destroy each corner of the router. A ton more time was given to the event before the self-destruction sequence. The hacking minigame was slowed down a bit in hotfix 6, and the explosion radius will now be shown upon failure. As for the mutator, it got a brand new model. It now has repulsion turrets, and the minigame wires were recolored to be more colorblind friendly. And hey, that's it for rival tech. Whether the developers will do more with them, only time will tell. Often when doing one of these evolution videos, I gain a higher appreciation of things. After mission evolution, I appreciated Refinery's pipe building more, even though I always liked that part. I even appreciate Escort Duty's refueling phase a bit more. But when it comes to Sabotage, I'm sorry. Gameplay-wise, there's nothing for me. I just appreciate the design and feel of rival tech overall more. And that's not exclusive to some, frankly speaking, over-designed mission. That second redesign of the facility, in my opinion, had more potential than what we ended up getting. Something about the generators being a much simpler and faster chore. Something about connecting the tethers to the facility itself that stuck with me. A part of me believes that if this version was more refined and had some adjustments made to it, then maybe... Hold up. I just thought of a way to improve the current industrial sabotage. With more dwarves!
Get it! Kill him! Nice.
Finally, it's playable! Somebody's fucking mad.